Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to this Tuesday night edition of the Angela Ray Show. I hope that you all have had a great day. As the days continue to go by, I have realized it's harder and harder to determine what is a weekday and what is a weekend. It's just the beginning of the week. We are halfway through 2020, which really seems hard to believe. It seems like it's already been 2 years instead of just 6 months. For everyone who will be catching this broadcast on the replay, thank you so much for checking out the Angela Ray Show. For all of my live viewers, you know what to do whenever you get on the broadcast. Go ahead and do me a favor. Slide into those comments and let me know where you are broadcasting from. As always, we will be getting started with our Ray of Motivation moment for the evening. I'm going to give you all a moment or two to get on the broadcast, and then we're going to kick off with our Ray of Motivation moment. Hey, Carlin, thank you so much for being on the broadcast. You're now one of the regulars here at the Angela Ray Show. Thanks so much. I appreciate the support. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our Ray of Motivation moment for tonight. And for our Ray of Motivation moment for tonight, I just want to remind you that you can agree to disagree. You can agree to disagree. In this time of so many polarizing viewpoints and opinions that are not only shown from the media, but also within our personal circles, particularly on social media, with people that we call friends, even sometimes our family members, colleagues, college alumni, high school alumni, people from our neighborhoods. So often, what I am witnessing is very divisive rhetoric going back and forth, so much so that it is very disheartening to see people just demanding that others just unfriend me. If you feel this way, unfriend me now. And I just want to remind you that even the best of friends, even the closest of relatives will not agree on everything. Now, yes, there are some fundamental issues that are deal breakers. We all have those. And it's important to know what those deal breakers are for people who are in your circle, who breathe the breath and the air around you. However, for those things that are maybe trivial, for those things that maybe aren't as important, it is okay for you just to agree to disagree and move on. And that is your Ray of Motivation moment for this Tuesday edition of the Angela Ray Show. Well, I'm really excited to welcome my guest for tonight. In education circles, he is known as America's leading reading ambassador for the past 2 decades. Dr. Danny Brassell has served as an educational advisor to students, ranging from preschool students to college students. He has worked in the classroom with teachers, with educators, and parents. So please help me welcome Dr. Danny Brassell. Danny, thank you so much for being on the Angela Ray Show tonight.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see you again, Angela. You're my ray of light all the time. I miss our talks.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had an opportunity to catch up, but you have been busy. I know that you have a new book out. You've written several books, but what has this? Yeah, gotta have that show and tell. So very, very important. What has this time been like for you in terms of the pandemic, particularly for you? Because I know you most days, most weeks, most months, you're on a plane flying all around the country to speak to students and educators and parents. So what has this time been like for you?
Well, first of all, I love what you said in your moment, your ray of light, or at the beginning. I just absolutely love that. It's one of the things I talk about in presentations is people need to learn how to be able to disagree with one another without being disagreeable toward one another. You and I don't have to agree, but we can still love and respect one another. And I think if people played by those ground rules, we'd be much better off. So How has the COVID affected me? Well, it's a great time to be a public speaker when all large public gatherings have been canceled, just like me, I'm sure. And so it requires a pivot. And so
Mhm.
I've always believed that when I'm struggling, I tend to just start giving as much as possible because God is very good to me, and things seem to come back my way. And so I started doing about 5 to 6 webinars a day for teachers all around the world. And I think this might be really my new business model. I mean, just yesterday was Monday. Yesterday, I was able to do webinars with schools in South Carolina, Maine, Minnesota, Bahrain, Pakistan. It was 5 of them yesterday, and it's incredible. I can't physically get on a plane and go to 5 different places on the planet like that, but I was able to seamlessly do it on Zoom. I mean, on Saturday, I had a live interview on Nigerian television. I was on Nepal TV last week. I mean, it's really opened up my eyes to all kinds of possibilities. And that's what I keep on telling people is in Chinese, the symbol for the word crisis is actually 2 characters. One means danger and the other one means opportunity. And there's all kinds of horrible things happening on the planet right now. We need to keep all these people in our thoughts and prayers, whether they've been affected by COVID or by, it's unbelievable to me that the whole George Floyd thing even exists. I thought we were so far beyond that, but that's me being a naive white person. I had no idea we had as much racial strife as we do. And hopefully we can take that negative and turn it into many positives. But that's where I'm talking about all the opportunities that are coming in right now. I mean, I think right now is an opportunity for us to completely reimagine education for the 21st century. There's all kinds of great possibilities. That's what I always like about you, Angela, is you're always looking at the possibilities. You're always ahead of the game. You're always looking for the pivot. What can we do to get better? And that's why you have this show, is you're one of the people that's trying to be one of the solutions, not one of the gripers.
And so you mentioned just you spent this opportunity given and doing these webinars, and we both know that when you sow, you definitely reap. So how has that reaping been for you?
Well, I mean, so I did an interview with a Pakistani TV station about a month ago, and I guess it resonated with a lot of educators, and I'm not supposed to publicly say this, I don't think yet, but it looks like I'm going to become the new dean of education for Constantinople schools in Islamabad, Pakistan, which is pretty cool. That's a new opportunity. I was blessed this last September. I was named a visiting distinguished professor at the American University in Cairo. And I kind of, and that's what, I'm always on planes. I absolutely love traveling because I've traveled all around the country, all around the world. And the more you get to meet people, the more you realize that we're not as extreme as people like to portray us. That when you get to the one-on-one conversations, most human beings are just really good people. I'll give you an example. In September, I was speaking to an international school it was near Cairo, and it was an Islamic school. And I mean, I didn't know what to expect. 2 in the afternoon, 400 parents showed up at this school. All the guys had the long beards. All the women were wearing burqas. And we were talking like you and I are talking right now. And I was like, wow, shame on me. I had a lot of preconceptions, and I just fell in love with the people. And me, reading is my thing. And I created a speech for them that they got a kick out of. I said, well, I've been reading this book. Have any of you ever read the Quran? And everybody laughed. I'm like, well, then you know the story. When the archangel Gabriel appears to Muhammad in the cave, what's his first instruction to Muhammad? Because in Islam, the first prophecy is to read. And so I told the parents, I said, so not only should we get our kids reading, it's actually written in your sacred text that it's your responsibility and duty to get them reading. And everybody from that point, I'm like, wow, probably my favorite audiences, right? Here I am, the Christian guy, and probably my favorite audiences are the Muslims, because they really have a passion for reading. So, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to instill that passion around the world.
Now, speaking of that passion, you have your Lazy Readers Club.
Yeah,
Talk a little bit about that and how many books you read, in a given year as a part of your Lazy Readers Club?
Well, I'm going crazy right now. I'm reading like crazy. I absolutely love that COVID has put me at home to read. I mean, I've read I think 3 books so far today, and I'm ready for my 4th. I get crazy. LazyReaders.com. I believe we began it in 2003. It was based on when I was teaching at the university. I was always talking about different books with my students, and they said, you really should create lists for us so we know which books to read. And then, so it started off as just a book club, but then a lot of people kept on telling me they had no time to read. And so I said, okay, you're just lazy readers. And so we created the website lazyreaders.com. And so if you subscribe, and everybody, you can subscribe, it's a free subscription. Once a month for the rest of your life, I give you 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something to read when you're stuck in a boring meeting or you're at the doctor's office. And really what I'm trying to encourage people is that the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. And so that's what I'm always trying to promote. And so like, if you really want to get people reading, so for example, when I was speaking to my Nigerian audience on Saturday, one of the flaws I see in a lot of education systems is in Nigeria. Nigeria used to be, it's only been a free country, I think, a democracy since the 1960s. Before that, it was a British colony. And the school system is still very British based. And so if you look at the reading list, it's a lot of books like Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare, which are all fine and good. And I'm not going to disparage them because I love those books. But if you really want to get a Nigerian kid interested in reading, they need to read Nigerian authors. When I was a kid, my father read to me Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, which was my first exposure to Nigerian culture. I think if Achebe had survived, I think he would have won the Nobel. I think he would have been the first African writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. It's just beautifully written. But that got me thinking about Nigeria. And so that's what I was really encouraging those teachers to do is I'm like, you know, again, Shakespeare is important, but before you get the kid reading Shakespeare, read about, you know, if you're a soccer fan in Nigeria, you know, one of their famous soccer players is a guy named Victor Howe. I'm like, well, have the kids read about Victor Howe, have them read about their history. I mean, that's how you get, I used to teach in South Central Los Angeles in the inner city. And when I was teaching in Watts, you know, I'm not going to get my 8th grade boys to read Macbeth. They have no interest in that. And so what we did is we read a whole bunch of Walter Mosley books. Walter Mosley is an author from South Central. And so he speaks in the same kind of language that the kids are used to hearing. He talks about places they're used to seeing. The situations are things they're familiar with. And so when we're reading Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, then I can say, okay, now let's relate this to Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare, his crew was just speaking a different way, just like all of us speak differently in our own little, and now the guys are like, oh, this isn't lame. This is just a different, and that's how you make the relationship. You got to get the kids interested. So Lazy Readers is just, I call it short books for busy people. And so people are always asking me for quick reads. And so I love to accommodate people based on whatever their interests are. So that's, if anybody wants to find some really good quick books to read, again, a lot of people think reading has to be some really thick book by Dostoevsky. But I mean, I always tell people I read 10 books a day. I mean, many of them are scratch and sniff and pop-up books, but I do read 10 books a day. And I'm kidding about that, but I'm not actually kidding that much. I actually get a lot of the best wisdom from reading the children's books. I'm sad to say the first book I ever read on Jackie Robinson was a 32-page picture book, and it got me interested. And so then I read a young adult version of Jackie Robinson. Now I've read like 9 different biographies on Jackie Robinson. I mean, I think, you know, he's actually one of my idols. I don't think Martin Luther King even happens without Jackie Robinson. I think this guy doesn't really get all the credit for what he did and the composure he showed. And I would not have started with an adult book. I got interested with the kid book, and I still do that before I go to parties. If I want to sound intelligent, I'll find some little picture book about like, oh, Elon Musk. Let's read about Elon Musk. Let's get some facts about Elon Musk. And coronavirus. I don't know much about it. Maybe they have a picture book about that. They do. They already do. So I'm constantly. That's how I'm informing myself. And then if I'm interested, then I'll pursue the much longer adult versions.
And so, how many subscribers or how many members are a part of the Lazy Readers Book Club?
Yeah, I wish I knew you were going to ask me that one, Angela. So the answer is I don't know, but I can tell you this. We started I think it was around 2003, and within 5 months, we were the #1 book club online. We passed Oprah, we passed Amazon, and I was trying to figure out why are we so popular. And then the webmaster did the data analysis, and he's like, oh, it's because middle school boys discovered the website and they started going there looking for short books to do their book reports on. So I was like, oh, that's pretty clever. So a lot of kids, they don't, which is fine to me. Any teacher that resents that, I'm like, well, wait a sec. You know, the kid that reads Captain Underpants is going to be a much better reader than the kid that's not reading anything. I mean, do I think Captain Underpants is highbrow literature? No. But if you get the kid interested in Captain Underpants, it's basically the gateway drug to Shakespeare. And that's what we're trying to do, is I'm trying to hook those kids. You know, I have the world's #1 online reading engagement program where I train parents. It's called readbetterinSixty7steps.com. Basically, in 2 months, just 67 days, every day parents get a video from me giving them an idea on how to get their kid excited about reading. I mean, I think schools do a decent job of teaching kids how to read, but the question I always ask teachers and parents is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read. You know, I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they're interested. Because once you light that fire, then all of your problems are over. Now you don't have to depend on schools. I always tell, I mean, now that there's millions of parents involuntarily homeschooling their kids, I think a lot of people have an appreciation for the public school system now. You know, you think your kid's tough. Try having 33 strange kids in a classroom and realize that all of them are completely different. They all have different motivations. And how do you accommodate those kids? And that's really what my program's geared towards, is how do we get a kid to read more, read better, and love reading? And it's great. People love the system because the kids do a lot better in reading. I mean, we have this one kid, Michael, who was a 3rd grader. He was the bottom of his class. His mom was at her wit's end, so she put him in the program. And within 40 days, his teacher called up the mother and said, is he on Ritalin? And she's like, no. And she's like, what are you doing with your son? Because he's gone from the bottom of my class to the top of my class in reading, which I thought was cool. But the things that I thought were really cool was Michael got so excited about reading, he started a book club for all of his buddies. And so now this teacher looks like the best teacher in the school because now all of these boys are reading like crazy because of the program. But what really touched my heart was that Michael's mother doesn't speak a word of English. She bought the program. The program was in English at the time. Michael did the program on his own without help from his mother. It's not designed for that. It's designed for the parent to do one-on-one with the kid. And that got me so upset that we made sure to translate the entire program into Spanish. So now we have it in Spanish and English, but we're also we're translating it right now into Tamil because we're in India, and we're trying to create an Arabic, Egyptian Arabic version, and a more general Arabic version because we're talking to the Saudi government now. But it's spreading around the world, and that's what I want. I want kids that are excited about reader. It's very important to me, you know, because tomorrow's leaders are today's readers, and I'm especially I'm concerned about a lot of the third world countries. That's why Nigeria and Egypt and India are very near and dear to my heart, because all 3 of those countries, more than half of their population is under the age of 24. So we can possibly have an impact on that entire generation to get them excited about reading. And in the process, you know, parents also like the program. I tell them at the end of the program, I'm like, you know, your kid's reading more and they love reading and they're doing a lot better in reading. We know that, but here's the best part of the program. I just taught you how to spend 20 minutes a day with your kid reading one-on-one. You just did that for 67 consecutive days. How many of us adults wouldn't have died as children for our parents to give us 20 minutes of attention every single day? I just gave you the gift of time. And so again, that's why I love you, Angela, is you look at all these crises not as the danger point, but as the opportunity. And so it's just about pivoting. And that's what you and I are good at.
Well, you have a question, and I'm going to be really interested to hear the
Oh,
answer
good.
from one of our very loyal viewers. It's
I
on
love
the
it.
screen. Can you see it?
Let's see. Edwin, what are the 3 books that changed your life? Okay, well, all right. So it goes without saying the Bible is always one of them. So I'm going to actually use that as my get out of jail card, Edwin. So you should read the Bible. I always tell people to read the Bible. Start and end your day with the Bible, because there's too much negativity in the world. I watched the worst TV show last night. It was called The News, and it put me in a foul mood. And you can't do that. You need positive things. And so even if you're not a believer, I'm a Christian, but even if I wasn't a Christian, I would recommend people read the Bible, because it's a piece of literature and there's all kinds of great stories there. It's a great story. That's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me the 3 books that changed my life. I'm going to look at my bookshelves right now. I'm going to cheat. There's so many of them. And I'd like to give some books that are a little bit less known, because I mean, Angela and I will always be able to tell you, like books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. This is a book that everybody knows about and everybody should read. I don't understand why it's not in the schools. Goodness. All right. I don't know if I'm going to be able to say 3 that have changed my life. But, well, okay. I'm going to go, all right, since you said 3, I can go with a children's level, a young adult, and adult level. So children's level, the book that changed my life was Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. When I was a little kid, I could just look at the pictures of that all the time. And I liked Max because he was a mischievous kid and he imagines going to this place where the wild things are. And I read it, and I actually was talking with Maurice Sendak, who was the author, and he's passed away, but he had such an impact on so many people. And Maurice Sendak, he said that when he was a little boy, his aunts and uncles used to come to his house every single weekend, and they had lots of beer and they made lots of noise, and they always tore up his house. And so when he was drawing the pictures of the monsters and Where the Wild Things Are, those are his aunts and uncles. And I always love sharing that story with kids, because kids need to understand this is where people get their inspiration. It's from things in their own. I mean, when I taught first grade, the stupidest thing I've ever said to a group of first graders is one day I said, all right, kids, write about your lives. And they looked at me like I was from outer space. They're like, we're only 6. Nothing's happened to us. No. Things happen to you every day. I'm like, when I was in first grade, I had this mean hag of a teacher. She smacked me on the hand one day, called me stupid, and got me to cry in front of the entire class. And so the next day when I was walking to school, I had an apple, and I peed on the apple. And when I got to school, I gave her the apple. She ate it and said it was the best apple she'd ever had. My first graders are like, that is awesome. This is also the reason I've never accepted food from a child. So I always tell people, if you want your kids to learn how to write stories, you have to give them stories, tell stories about that. For middle school, actually, I just started reading this with my daughter, so I'm going to pull this one out. This was one of my favorite books growing up, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. And it's a short book. It's only 150 pages, but I just absolutely love the story. I love Passepartout, who's one of my favorite characters of all time. It's just it's a really well-written book, and I love Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. For an adult book, I'm going to give I could give you I've been talking to business people all day, and they've been asking me for business recommendations. I'm going to give you a fun recommendation, Edwin. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. That was probably the first book that I had to put down almost every page because I was laughing on it. I mean, there's so many funny things in that book. Now, gosh, I gave you 3 books, and I'm giving you no diversity because those are all three white guys wrote those books. And so it also depends. I mean, and that's something also when I'm doing lazy readers, I'm trying to figure out what interests people. And so when I was teaching in the inner city, I had all these African-American teenage girls that were interested in cooking. And so I started reading a whole bunch of cooking books. And so, you know, you see me reading like a Paula Deen book or something. I was on a plane. Angela, you'll love this story. I'm in first class on a United flight. I'm next to this businessman, and I'm reading a book by Sister Souljah. And he's looking at me like, what's your problem, dude? And it was actually a really well-written book. Sister Souljah, she was the gal that there was a whole thing about her with Bill Clinton or whatever, but she's actually a really good author. I was very interested in the whole book. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Marquez. How am I screwing up his name? Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I think it's something like that. I love Isabel Allende. Anything Isabel Allende writes. So we'll give you some Latin authors. I told you Chinua Achebe. If you're going to read anything, I think if you're starting in African literature, it starts with Things Fall Apart, which is just an incredible novel by Chinua Achebe. Let me see if I can get to India. Oh, actually, that was another book that changed my life. Was I read an autobiography by Gandhi, and if you read that book, it's fascinating. Because it's a fascinating book about Gandhi's life, and the book was published in 1925. So the book was published before he freed India. I mean, it's unbelievable going through, and it's also interesting because you learn that I didn't realize that Gandhi had started his legal career in South Africa, and he was mistreated in South Africa because apartheid was not just for the Africans; it was also for the Indians and everybody. And if they hadn't kicked him out of South Africa, I mean, South Africa may have had liberation much earlier. I mean, there's another good book, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. I mean, this guy, it's amazing when you read about human beings like Nelson Mandela. I can't believe he existed. I mean, this is true government policy in South Africa. When he became president, he created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which basically anybody that had murdered a black person during apartheid, they had to stand up in a courtroom in front of the family of whoever they murdered and admit to the murder and apologize. And that was it. They didn't go to jail or anything. This was the government policy. And I think it was the Minister of Justice before Mandela, a white guy, he had like 10 guys murdered and executed. And so he was a Christian and he believed that he needed penance. And so he apologized. And then Mandela said, you need to wash the feet of the mothers of the sons that you killed. And this guy washed the feet of the mothers. And I'm like, it was incredible because it was such a tense time. And the reconciliation process happened so quickly. That's the power of one person. I mean, that's one of my biggest regrets in life. I never got to meet Nelson Mandela, John Wooden, the old basketball coach at UCLA. I'm like, man, I wish I had met him. These are people I'd love to go out to lunch with. I got to meet, here's somebody you'll love, Angela. Do you know Marian Wright Edelman?
Yes. Marian
Wright Edelman is so cool. She's like one of my idols. Before President Bush Jr. adopted the No Child Left Behind program, was what he called it, but that was the name of her organization. And, it bothers me meeting my idols because I always worry that they're going to be jerks. And Marian Wright Edelman was so gracious and had so much time for me, and she was so generous, and which is smart because she didn't know this, that I'd become a speaker and I would tell that story to millions of people about how much I adore her and how she lived up to the expectations. So Edwin, I'm sorry, you gave a very short question. I gave you about 10 different books, but hopefully you were taking some notes so you can read some of those. And if you have book recommendations for me, Edwin, I'd love to hear them because I love seeing what people are reading.
Well, he has a follow-up question.
And let's see, Edwin, he says, can reading compete with video games, social media, and other digital entertainment? Absolutely. Great question, Edwin. So I used to have a nonprofit called Real Dads Read. And so I'd get these dads in the room and I'd say, so dads, you want to know why your kids like football so much? It's because that's the only time you spend with them. If you spent your time reading to them, they'd all be readers. My pastor says it really well. He says, parents, you have the greatest home field advantage on the history of the planet. You could be the worst parent ever, but your kids don't know it. To them, you're mom or dad. And so kids mimic exactly what we do. And so, if If you're playing video games, your kids are going to be playing video games. I always read to my kids. So I have 3 kids. I have an 11-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 16-year-old. And so my youngest daughter right now, we're reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. We had just read Tom Sawyer, so we have to read Huck Finn now. My son, we're just finishing The Great Train Robbery by Michael Crichton. He's the guy that wrote Jurassic Park. Great Train Robbery is a fantastic book. And after that, we're going to read The Killer Angels by Michael Shara, which is about the Battle of Gettysburg. That's absolutely one of the best books I've ever read. I should have given that as one of my recommendations earlier. And then my oldest daughter, I told you earlier, we're reading Around the World in 80 Days together. And so that's time. That's time with my kids. I love it. It's probably my most cherished time. Do I play video games with the kids? Yeah, absolutely. So some of the tricks so this might help you, Edwin. I'm constantly in the reading engagement program. I'm trying to give parents practical tips. And so here's a couple of quick wins for you. So my kids, I have the feeling that television is here to stay. And so I don't eliminate television from my kids, but my kids know the price of admission before they turn on the TV. They have to bring me an article or a book, and we read together before that TV goes on. So we're getting in our minutes that way. When you do turn on the television, President Bush Sr. 30 years ago signed very important legislation in America that said every single television set in America has to have closed captioning. So turn on the closed captioning. A lot of people say, well, wait a sec. If the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? That's a fair point, but let me make a point. How many of us have ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at those subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain is directed towards the text. And so that's just another way to get the kids looking at things. And then the other thing I would say, Edwin, I was working with a 4th grader, and his teacher's like, well, Tyrell, he doesn't know how to read. I'm like, okay, well, let me work with Tyrell. So I'm working with Tyrell, and in 1 hour's time, the kid who didn't know how to read must have texted at least 10 of his friends. He opened up several emails. He was surfing the web. He's highly literate. His teacher's using a definition from 75 years ago. Reading isn't just reading an actual physical book anymore. Reading can be, I think kids are probably more literate than they've ever been. You see kids on their phones all the time now. They're reading constantly. And then even YouTube can show you the statistics. This is good for marketing, Angela. Always remember this, that videos that don't have captioning have 80% less viewership than videos with captioning. And so that's why if you're going to put a video up online, you should always caption it. And the reason is because a lot of people will watch the video while they're at work or whatever, and they have the sound turned off, and so they still get the dialogue that way. So hopefully that was a couple of good tips for you, Edwin. Thank you for the questions. I love it.
Well, you got a book recommendation from Kevin.
All right, let's see it. In West Mills by Deshaun Charles Wynn. I haven't heard of that one. It was published last year and just released on paperback. Man, Kevin, I will. Angela, can you put that in the show notes so I have that, because I want to check that out.
Yep, I'll make sure.
Yeah, you want to just check. So we want to check different things. I love it, and I love that, Kevin, because you really need to. I always pick out books based on what my kids are interested in, so like right now is a great time. Even my own 3 children, they've been showing an interest, because we've had between COVID and Black Lives Matter. So like my oldest daughter, I'm going to read to her The Hot Zone, which is about this global pandemic. And then, my own kids, I never thought I'd be able to read to them books by like Walter Mosley. And I realized that's actually part of my responsibility. When I taught in Compton, most of my students were African American and Latino, and a mom said it to me very well. She's like, I don't need you to teach my kid to be black. And she was actually right. Because my students were primarily African American Latino, I made sure to have lots of literature, which was African American literature and Latino literature, which is part of my job. But the other part of my job is to expose the kids to other types of literature that they might not normally be exposed to. And I would say the same thing now to any, like if I was teaching in the suburbs to like a whole white class, well then yeah, I'll teach them white authors, but it's also, I need to expose the kids to Asian authors and to African authors and some diversity that way. And actually that's hopefully one of the positives that's coming from this Black Lives Matters movement is we're starting to ask those types of questions. I was part of a panel the other day, and somebody said, well, why is it all the white people are protesting during Black Lives Matter? And my buddy, who's African American, he said, because the white people didn't know that this existed. And I was like, he's right. Like, I thought, I now realize I'm a naive white guy. I thought we were so well past a lot of these issues. And I realized, wow, there's people that still believe these things. And so it's really important that we have these discussions. And I agreed with Angela earlier, like we shouldn't just shut people out. That's not helping anything. It's a great opportunity to engage one another and to have a respectful being the key, conversation. Let's have a respectful dialogue. Let's exchange different points of view. And I think that's a great, hopefully we'll take this opportunity and make it into something really great. We're in charge of that. Leslie has a question. Good.
I think this may have been almost what you're about to say or what you were saying.
Are you familiar with We Need Diverse Books? How much of your efforts go to ensuring that Black kids and non-Black kids of color? Yeah, okay, yeah. So that's exactly, Leslie, you're absolutely right, because that's what we need to be doing is, I think that reading lists are really important. We should be paying attention to the different types, because when I was a student, like, the classics were all like Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare. We had to read Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it was very, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity there. And so again, hopefully we're going to take this opportunity, and that's why I love it. I love my friends from different backgrounds recommending different books, because there's so many things there's just so many things I don't know about. I mean, I just was reading a story about this slave, and the way he was able to free himself is he literally put himself in a box, put on postage, and it took him 2 days.
Henry Box, mailed himself all the way to Philadelphia.
That's the coolest story. I'm like, who is this guy? He's a rock star. He took this complex problem and he came, what's the fastest solution? I'm like, that guy's the smartest guy I've ever seen. I thought that was fascinating. I said this, I started teaching 30 years ago now. And I was, my kids and I always had the discussion, like, why do we have Black History Month? And I'm like, you're absolutely right. We should have all culture for the year. It shouldn't just be, it's February, the shortest month of the year, let's do Black History Month. I'm like, no, because two of my favorite poets are E.E. Cummings and Langston Hughes. And that's absolutely, I don't want to have to wait till February to expose my kids to E.E. Cummings and Langston Hughes or Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou's like the cream of the crop. Or like, this is something all of you can do. When I was a kindergarten teacher, the very first book I read to my students is always The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. When I was a high school teacher, the first book that I would read to my 12th graders was Oh, the Places You'll Go. And what I was trying to do is from day one, I wanted to show kids that great literature has no grade level, that adults can enjoy kids' books and kids can understand. I'd read to my kindergartners, I think The Color Purple by Alice Walker is one of the most beautifully written books ever written. And if you've ever heard her, if you ever have a chance to watch Alice Walker do a reading, you've got to. I mean, she has the most beautiful voice, and it's so much better coming from the author. But these are the types of books we should definitely be, we need to expose kids to everything. So that's a great question. And hopefully all of us as parents, we need to have these types of standards. We don't have to be confrontational about it, but it's a legitimate question is why, if your kid has 12 books on the list and all of them were written by dead white guys, what's that all about? We can do better than that.
So as we wrap up, because we're almost 40 minutes in. I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about your current book on leadership.
You're awesome, Angela. It's called Leadership Begins with Motivation. And before I forget, I want to reward your viewers, for everybody watching. If you go to freereadingtraining.com, you can download a free copy. You get a free copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. That's a book. I wrote it for a principal who didn't know how to engage his faculty. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So once a week, I give you a positive concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, something that you can read in 5 minutes that demonstrates the same concept. And I'm also going to give you a couple of free digital trainings, because parents are the best teachers. Now, the Leadership Begins with Motivation book, when I was a kid, I used to love listening to Paul Harvey on the radio. Paul Harvey passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old. And he used to always come up on the radio and be like, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And he always gave these stories, and I was always glued to them. And so I wanted to write a book of all of these stories. And so this actually is a good shame on me, because this actually was something I noticed as I published the book. I'm like, you know what? Too many of these stories are about like Americans. A lot of them are about white guys and stuff and businesses. And I thought about that because when I go back to Egypt, I want to write a book just like this, but I want it to have examples of Egyptians, because I think kids, they benefit when they see somebody that looks like them, where they're like, wow, that person was able to do that. Maybe I can do that someday. And so that's why I was researching that story about that slave was just phenomenal. I was just reading a story about, well, I don't want to give away that whole book, but this book actually, you can get this book on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's actually free. So check it out. It's just inspirational stories to put a smile on your face. There's too much negativity in the world. That's why push that aside and just stick with Angela Ray. She'll make you a better person.
Well, I appreciate that plug. As we get ready to wrap up, of course, your Twitter is scrolling at the bottom of the screen, as well as the website you just mentioned, DannyBrassell.com and freereadingtraining.com. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
You know, I just looked at the comments because I haven't been looking at the comments. So Edwin, he loved the Scarlet Letter, so I apologize, Edwin. That book drove me crazy. You know, Hester Prynne had to wear an A for adulteress on her chest. After I read that book, I wanted to wear a B on my head because I was so bored reading that book. But that's what I love about this, is you and I don't have to love the book, but we can have a discussion about the book. And I love talking to people about what they're reading and why they're reading, because then I want to read it. And this is how we all grow, is by these types of conversations. So I love everybody that's watching. You're doing a great job because you're feeding your mind. There's so much, you know, you could have just sat and drank and watched the news, which is useless. Like, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And again, Angela, I just adore you. I haven't seen you forever, and thank you for having me, and thank you for this entire forum.
Well, I appreciate you being here. And again, Danny has a free book club called lazyreaders.com that you all, if you're interested in how to incorporate more reading, which during this time of being away from people, and there are definitely essential workers whose lives have not changed. They've actually intensified in terms of work. But if you're looking to incorporate more reading, definitely that's a way to do it. You know, this is Influencer Week, and I do believe, Danny, you are one of the biggest influencers in America on kids and parents reading. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Angela. Keep on doing everything that you do.
All right. Have a great evening.
God bless.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this Tuesday edition of the Angela Ray Show. I know we had a lot of questions, but Danny actually has another interview to do tonight. So I wanted to make sure that he's able to get to that. As always, I would like to remind you of Ray of Motivation number 54. Cleaning a mirror does not change the person who is reflected in it. Until next time, I encourage you all to go out and be the change. Have a great evening.